I'd ask Councilman Davis to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please all rise and remain standing? I believe Councilman Nolden also has a special request at the end of the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would like to have a moment of silence for Councilwoman Jackie Poplar's sister, Anjanae Harpin, who passed away this weekend in Grand Rapids.
Can we also add Sophronia Wilson to that as well, please?
And also former city employee Ann Parker, who used to work at the golf course, who retired after 18 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting are on file. Was your pleasure?
Move that they be accepted.
It's been moved. Is there support? It's been moved and supported. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? They are so ordered. We have a special order this afternoon. Special Order 140175 requested by the Emergency Manager Darnell Early for the presentation of the proposed fiscal year 2014-15 and fiscal year 2015-16 budget. Mr. Early.
Mr. President.
Mr. Mays.
Yeah, we had discussion in the last council meeting as it related to the emergency manager order and special orders, and I see that this one is on the agenda, and so I don't know, when I listened to the city attorney last meeting, you know, he used the term gross negligence. And I'm really concerned about special orders because I had one that was not on the agenda. So if we proceed with this special order, and I know Robert's rules allow us to do special orders and things of that nature, then I'll chime back in on it. But I'm kind of glad to see a special order because that's clearly what I understood in the emergency manager order after the Pledge of Allegiance. So without any further communications at this point, I'll chime back in after this particular special order. But it refers to special orders, apostrophe, in parentheses S on the order. So I'm ready to proceed with this special order.
I'll deal with this special order first, and then we'll come back to yours.
Thank you.
Councilman Mays. Mr. Early, you may proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. To the members of the City Council, to the Mayor, what you have in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, is the proposed biennial budget for the City of Flint. This budget covers the 2014, 2015, and 2015-16 fiscal years found in the text of the state law. The budget as proposed represents a balanced, responsible, and sustainable spending plan for the 2 fiscal years. Because it is expected that sometime within the implementation of this budget, the City of Flint will possibly transition back to local control as provided in Public Act 436. Therefore, your input and engagement in the process is hereby requested. The Finance and Administration Committee will begin its review of the budget, and staff will be made available to discuss the recommendations, speak to the utilization of resources, and assist the committee in its understanding of the proposals as presented. I look forward to the dialogue on the proposed spending plan. Please keep in mind that in order for your input to be productive, it must take into account the significant financial challenges yet confronting the City of Flint. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that Public Act 436 requires the adoption of a balanced budget. And to that extent, I'd like to just talk briefly about the process, and then I'm going to ask the mayor to talk a little bit about his involvement in the process going forward. And then I'll ask Mr. Ambrose and the finance team to walk you through the highlights of the proposal as we're presenting it. As I stated earlier, the city has an obligation to budget responsibly, and that has led to this two-year budget proposal that you have before you. The budget is balanced for both fiscal year 15 and fiscal year 16. The city remains in a budgetary crisis that significantly impairs our ability to provide public safety and other city services at an optimal level. However, we do see this as the beginning of the process and not the end. Therefore, over the next 6 months, we're going to be working to prevent any immediate disruption in public safety services due to reductions that can be achieved within the first half of fiscal year 2014-15, thus not immediately laying off and making this a managed process in anticipation of our revenues based on the information that you have in front of you. The city, quite frankly, is unable to fully fund its police and fire department at current levels. And this undermines our ability to provide the needed public safety services. We are addressing this through a study of police and fire services, the results of which we will present at a later date, and use that study in reorganizing and redeveloping the public safety organization. The city will continue working towards a resolution of the retiree health care lawsuit. And this, in and of itself, is a huge multi-million-dollar obligation that must be managed. The mayor and I will seek state support for increased revenue opportunities wherever possible, for residents to vote on increased income tax rates or other structures that may be made available. It'll be a choice that the people will be asked to make once we figure out what road we can travel in getting to that. We also will be seeking state assistance to participate in any kind of OPEB or other post-employee benefit pools that establish some opportunity for distressed communities to manage further the burden of pension and retiree health costs. We will continue to complete an organizational restructuring of the city's operations. Our organization is a fluid one. We're looking at ways to consolidate, to make sure that there is no duplication of services, and to make sure that our policies reflect the most efficient and effective use of the resources that we have. We will engage our partners in the area and other organizations throughout the city and county and the state for ways in which to provide that support in providing services. Throughout the two-year budget period, the Michigan State Police has indicated that they will continue their directed patrol and investigative support for public safety in Flint. We want to galvanize that support going forward. We want to make sure that the state has a presence in assisting just as they've established over the past few months. Throughout the two-year budget period, we will also be looking at the stability leading towards the final 3 years of our 5-year financial analysis. And the reason why we have to do that is because the 5-year financial analysis does not paint a very optimistic picture of financial conditions over the next 5 years. Beyond this budget period, we will still face significant financial challenges without major revenue increases. The two-year budget gives the city stability while we work to achieve a long-term solution. That is important to understand because the job of the emergency manager and the staff and everyone working together is to restore stability and to prepare for transition. We were well on that road and making significant progress until we had to deal with the issues regarding retiree health care. That in and of itself is not the only defining issue, but it certainly provides the most troublesome challenge and requires the most attention to find resolution for, because it has a long-term impact on the city's ability to stay solvent. What we've done in this document, and I want to take a moment just to acknowledge and thank Mr. Jerry Ambrose, the Finance Director, Mr. Antonio Brown, the Deputy Finance Director, and all the staff in the Finance Department who have worked diligently to put this document together based upon the work that we all did with respect to strategic planning and the hearings and some of the other meetings that were held under the leadership of Finance and Administration Chair Councilman Freeman. But now the work begins, the work of looking at exactly what is in the budget and how can we assure that we maintain that stability based on all the work that has gone into this process thus far. As I said, my job as emergency manager is to restore stability and to prepare for transition. It says so right in PA 436. Essentially what we've done in this document and will continue to do as we implement the document and have the discussions, rather, before adoption and implementation, is we've shoehorned 2 years of financial stability into a very tight revenue and expenditure fit. But we will have to make other adjustments, and we will have to manage this process. As we come up to the 3 years, or the final 3 years of our 5-year analysis, we know those challenges are there. But we intend to manage the process through attrition. We intend to manage the process through aggressive pursuit of any possible additional revenue sources. And we intend to get the feedback and input not only from the council, but the public as we go forward. And I think that is important because here again, the ownership of the budget has to extend beyond the emergency manager and the finance department. And so I'll be looking forward to those discussions. The process now will be to move this matter into your committees where we can have the detailed discussions about the issues that we're attempting to address within the budget, and also as it relates to the department heads and their abilities to provide services and how they envision that, all in accordance with the priorities and the strategic plans as was laid out by the council, which you adopted. And to the extent that we're able to reflect those, you will see that they are reflected to a large extent. And with that, I'd like to ask the mayor to make a few statements regarding this budget, because he's also been involved in a lot of the discussion and where we got to this point. And then I'll ask Mr. Ambrose to walk you through the highlights in the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Early. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Clearly, we are at a critical point, and our financial reality is as tough as ever. I hope that we can work together as elected officials, the 10 of us, to see what we can recommend to improve the budget. I'm committed to working with everyone to identify all available resources and to filling the gap in the police and fire department budgets. I believe we must take advantage of the coming weeks to do what we can to alter this situation. Currently, the facts are as they've been presented. We have to see what we can do to alter those facts. While we continue to search for operational efficiencies, and you'll hear about those from the department heads, we must redouble our lobbying efforts for the state to allow communities revenue options, such as the expanded local income tax. We'll push for the state to be a partner in addressing the rising municipal OPEB costs and investing in cities with fair revenue sharing. We are all state of Michigan taxpayers, and our community deserves fair and equitable support from the state. As the governor and state legislators look at options on Detroit, we'll demand that Flint and other core communities, which are the heart of our 21st century economy, will receive some relief too. It shouldn't take another municipal bankruptcy to get appropriate attention and equitable investment. We'll continue to seek grants and assistance from all of our partners, including the feds and the foundations, so we can implement our master plan in a collaborative manner and move toward our sustainable future. There are steps in the presented budget that I believe will assist us in that effort. You know, we've all worked long and hard together to define a vision, to develop a plan, and we're all supporting our community by volunteering our time as citizens above and beyond our duties. We're all paying our taxes, and we're serving under some very difficult circumstances. So now we have to see what we can do to alter these facts of our financial situation so that the budget can be adjusted and some services protected and enhanced. So again, I'm asking each of you as city council members and every concerned citizen to look at every alternative and new idea. We have a month before the budget will even be adopted under the current schedule. I'll work with you through the committee hearings. My door is always open. Citizens know they can come see me any Wednesday morning to talk about their ideas for the budget, ask questions about our financial situation. I'm always happy to do that. I believe we're at a point where we have to find a way forward. That won't happen here tonight. Tonight, the alarm bell goes off with the facts and figures that are in front of you. So we all need to step up over the coming weeks and see what we can do to recommend to improve the budget, especially to preserve police and fire services. So thank you for your time and attention. I very much do look forward to working with you despite the difficulty of these circumstances that we find ourselves facing. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Ambrose.
Thank you and good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Early and Mayor Walling have outlined some general parameters of the challenges that we have. And I think first and foremost, we have to remember that what we do as a city has to be done in a financially responsible way. We can't make promises that we can't keep. We can't spend money that we don't have. A lot of work has gone on over the last couple of years looking at the potential for the future of the city of Flint. Master planning process, a very excellent example of that. We've also made progress in reducing the city's deficit and looking forward to the time as transition occurs and the city gets back to home rule. But for today, for tomorrow, for FY15, FY16, and beyond, we continue to have very significant financial challenges, very evident as we put this budget together. A couple of things, as you will remember from last year, we did present a 5-year forecast. So as a city, it doesn't work only to look, a week ahead or a year ahead. We need to be looking 2, 3, 4, and 5 years ahead. And so what you have right now is a proposed 2-year budget, and it is followed by 3 years of projections, so that as you look at that, we can focus on 15, 16, and think ahead to 17, 18, and 19. If there's one challenge we have right now that we did not really want to have to deal with, and that is the consequence of the challenge to our changes in retiree health care. That's a significant issue, clearly, to retirees. It's a very important issue for this city for FY15. The current status of that lawsuit and the proceedings require us to add nearly $5 million to our expense base for FY15, and that number will continue to escalate in 16, 17, 18, 19, unless and until the retiree lawsuit is resolved one way or another. And at the same time, we have a city whose services over the last several years have been reduced significantly in virtually every area. High priority in past years as we've dealt with position reductions to avoid reductions in police and fire. And the consequence there is that, in our opinion, and reflected in this budget, those services are at a very minimal level now, and it is difficult, if not impossible, to further reduce those services. The consequence then is, as we look, if we need to reduce our expenditures for services in order to balance a budget, we have to look at police and we have to look at fire staffing. It's something we don't do lightly. It is the last place anybody wants to go as you look at having to reduce services. But if your financial circumstance requires it, it's what you have to do. We have and as the mayor and Mr. Early have both mentioned, we have to embark upon this path in a very managed way. That means that we want to take the next 6 months to have expert assistance advise us in terms of how we best use the resources that we have for police and fire. We need to continue our fight to prevail in the challenge of retiree health care, which, to be clear, was not ever a proposal to eliminate retiree health care. It was a proposal to change it to make it more cost affordable. And then finally, we will also continue to work at the potential of finding other revenue sources, other partnerships in which we can continue to augment our city services. So as we have balanced this budget before you, we have recognized the financial emergency that exists and that continues. We've also recognized the priorities that you as a council adopted, and we hope that as we move, or expect that as we move into the meetings in the next 2 weeks to review the budget in detail, we will be able to explain to you how we've addressed your priorities, to get your reaction, your understanding of how that happened. That's a large purpose of that budget. We also would fully expect that you might have some different ideas than what we have had, and we certainly will be open to considering them. So in the big picture, we're all used to talking about a general fund budget which is somewhat short of $60 million in big pictures. And you need to think about the notion that the world is getting a little bit better in the economy, and in fact, the revenues for the general fund are projected to be up by about $1 million or so. Unfortunately, as we look at our cost figures, at our cost of continuing current services, and we have to factor in the need to add additional costs for retiree health care, we have to recognize the implications of pension contributions. We find that the demand for dollars to continue current services required between $8 and $9 million, or almost $10 million. So we had a gap of almost $9 million as we begin our process. And it's a significant challenge. It's a challenge that we've had in past years, and it's a challenge we're facing now. So the budget before you balances the need to be financially stable against the priorities, against what now exists, against what we would like to do. And in brief, first of all, some of the highlights. The costs to the taxpayers are increased. Point one, though, property tax levies remain unchanged. Secondly, the street lighting assessment is increased a few dollars. The solid waste fee is increased. And pursuant to the recommendations of the Raftelis group, there's a recommendation to increase the water and sewer rates.
Mr. President, I can hardly hear him.
Can you pull your mic up,
Yeah,
please?
sorry. Okay.
Could you repeat the increases starting with street light assessment?
Well, if you look at the page 27 of your budget document, you will see that the total cost increases are estimated at $137 in 15 and $124 in FY16, depending on the value of the house and income. That could be in range of between 3 and 4% on an annual basis. That's one part. And as we balanced budgets in the past several years, we've had to look at increasing costs. We've had to look at reducing services. We've increased cost to taxpayers. We've increased cost to employees. So as I mentioned, there is some increase to cost to taxpayers. There are costs to city employees, which we expect to be increased as we look at the amount of premium share that employees need to be paying. We are looking at the costs which will be incurred by new retirees who are not Medicare eligible in terms of premium contribution. We are making other changes. My point is there are increases in costs to taxpayers. There are increases in costs to employees. Our legacy costs are increasing significantly. They're increased in the general fund alone by 25%, from $8 million to $10 million, and increases in a yearly basis thereafter. The general fund costs for retiree health care and pension, those are generally what's referred to as legacy costs, in total are projected to increase from $16.4 million in the general fund in FY14 to $21.5 million by FY19. That means in FY15, nearly one out of every $3 goes for legacy costs. And that will increase from 31% to 34% in FY19. In total costs for retiree health care and pension are projected to increase from $30.4 million in FY14 to $43 million by FY19. It's a significant cost to the city. As we take that into account and we look at city staffing will be budgeted at $529 in 15 and $530 in 16. We are maintaining staffing in the district court, 911, finance, assessing, transportation, a few others. In the police department, the total staffing will be 115. We currently have 7 positions vacant. We will be eliminating an additional 29 positions through attrition by the end of FY15, and that's December of 15. The next several months, we will not, as I talked before, and as the mayor has mentioned, as Mr. Early has mentioned, we will not be doing this quickly or lightly. We will be doing it with a lot of thought and total focus on mitigating the impact of this on our residents and our businesses. And as you all know, the SAFER grant for the fire department, which has funded in the past 39 positions, was not renewed. And as the consequence is our department, the fire department, will reduce from 94 positions to 75, with 20 of those positions that were funded by the SAFER grant now being funded by the police and the fire millage. And let me say that the police and fire millage will, over the next 2 years, will now be fully utilized to maintain even these levels of police and fire. There was much discussion early on when this millage was initially passed that perhaps we should use the money immediately to add more staff. We cautioned that looking forward, we would need that money to attempt to maintain police and fire staffing on a more stable level. That's exactly what is going to happen in FY15 and FY16. By the end of 16, we will have utilized any residual funds in the police and fire millage, and we will be using, on a going forward basis, then only the millage that's generated every year. As I mentioned before, one of the initiatives of the city has been the development of the master plan, a lot of emphasis on planning to grow this city, to make it sustainable. We've recognized and talked before many times about the importance that we continue to have capacity within the city organization to assure that there is pressure to implement that master plan, because it won't happen all by itself, and we don't want to see it on a shelf. Same is said for continuing to manage blight. We have a blight coordinator funded currently by a grant position. That position, the funding for that grant is ending. This budget says in planning and neighborhood, in planning and development, we will budget sufficient general fund dollars to continue the blight management, the blight coordinator, as well as to assure that there is some capacity to implement the master plan. I am sure, unfortunately, that there is not the level of capacity that one would like to see on that, but in the context of balancing this budget, it is perhaps the minimal amount that we felt we could do. In the Public Works Department, primarily if we think about our utilities division, we are adding staff there as the treatment plant begins operation as the primary source for the Flint water. And we are also increasing staff in our facilities to address some critically needed maintenance issues here. The facilities department here is probably a good example of, as one has to make serious reductions in staffing, perhaps one goes too far and we end up in a situation where the critically needed repairs to buildings are not made. And the consequence of continuing to ignore those things result in extra cost and extra crisis into the future. We are also adding a position in the Treasurer's Office to increase our delinquent collections. We've started that in this last year. Our goal is to monitor more aggressively delinquent collections. We fully expect and have budgeted that the cost of the additional positions there will be covered by additional revenues from those efforts. And in fact, we expect that over that fairly soon it will do more than cover its cost. It will more than cover its cost. And finally, as we think about the governance of the city and going forward, and as efforts to resolve the financial emergency make progress, as Mr. Early mentioned, the position of city administrator will be filled. Additionally, the salaries of the mayor and the council are partially restored as their role in governance increases. With respect to the specific priorities that the council adopted, first priority was maintaining police and fire staffing at levels to the maximum level feasible. I think we've addressed the extent to which this budget addresses those. Secondly, the council's priority indicated reducing the general fund deficit by at least $1 million. As we did this year, and the prior year, general fund expenses are budgeted at $1 million less than revenues. And then additionally, $800,000 in capital improvement funds are appropriated to utilities for capital improvements there, thus reducing the general fund debt to the utility by a like amount. Our plan is to continue that commitment for the next several years until the deficit is eliminated, and then to continue that commitment until the city has accumulated a sufficient reserve to operate on a sustainable basis. One looks at best practices for a financially solvent institution. For example, it is recommended that a reserve in the amount of 10 to 15% of general fund revenue should be established and maintained, and we are planning to continue that. Next priority was continuing efforts to reduce blight, including demolition. We will continue to use CDBG funds for demolition and general fund, and as I mentioned before, the general fund will assume partial cost to the blight coordinator. Hiring an experienced city administrator, another city priority. Funds are included in the budget. Assuring that capacity exists to implement the master plan. I believe I mentioned that before, and there are funds dedicated to that. Additionally to that, the mayor is committed to overseeing the process of assuring that the master plan implementation becomes an important ongoing part of city operations. Another priority was adding capacity in the areas of economic development. The Planning and Development Director is committed in FY15 to defining a program for small business development with the expectation that it will be funded in FY16 using CDBG funds. Additionally, we intend as much as possible to continue the current allocation of staff time by DCED staffers to economic development. And once again, the mayor has committed to leading the city's economic development efforts with partners and the assistance of the city staff. Next priority from the council was to fund years 1 and 2 of the capital improvements identified in the master plan. The capital improvements of the master plan process will be finalized within the next several months, and the results will be considered at the appropriate time for inclusion in the FY16 budget. You will see in this budget document a list of capital improvement projects, but they are primarily facility improvements, addressing badly needed facility improvements in the city, in addition to some technological upgrades at the 911 center for telephone and for computers. Improving street maintenance. There is no additional general fund money or other city money truly available to improve street maintenance, and there is minimal increases at this time in state fundings for streets, so the maintenance efforts will continue at current levels. We have been successful so far this year in obtaining some state financial support for some specific major street projects, and particularly some of those that are related to economic development. Establish parks partnerships. The Planning and Development Department now has oversight over the parks, and one of its strategic objectives has been to commit to increase the number of parks partnerships in FY15 and 16. We also intend to improve customer service through training and technology, another council priority. Our Human Resources Department, as it did this year, is committed to continuing ongoing training for supervisors and will be extending these efforts to all employees. Our IT department, likewise, is committed to providing ongoing training for employees. And finally, most departments are including funds for ongoing training for employees, for their employees. For example, the Treasury's Customer Service Division is committed to specific customer service training for its frontline employees. Increasing the removal of dead and diseased trees. Oversight of the removal of trees within the street right-of-way is now the responsibility of the Transportation Division of Public Works. Removal of trees within parks is now the responsibility of Planning and Development. and the removal of trees on other city properties is a responsibility of the Facilities Department of Public Works. Unfortunately, there is only a limited amount of funds available for these purposes, and the general effort will be focused on emergency responses. However, the Transportation Division, for example, is committed to attempting to secure assistance from other entities to increase our capacity to address this problem. And finally, the priority for the council was to evaluate ways to reduce water and sewer rates for constituents in the budget process. The results of the recent rate study confirmed it's unlikely that water and sewer rates can be decreased at any time in the foreseeable future, and in fact has recommended that rates need to be increased. And that's what's included in this budget, and that was also included in the calculation of the cost to taxpayers. I would emphasize that the actions that were taken to date to join KWA and to temporarily use the Flint River show that future rate increases will be less than had the city stayed with its prior provider. I would also note that, because there was a lot of comments about the potential cost savings that may occur in the short term to the city as a result of using the Flint River, that while we have a good plan, we are in the process of implementing that, and I fully expect that there are some developments, positive and negative, we will deal with as we implement. I just will say that I think that if the performance of the use of the Flint River exceeds our expectations as we think about the FY16 budget, then we should revisit any decision on rate increases at that time. But at this point in time, I think it would be very premature to stray away at all from the recommendations of our water and sewer rate consultants. So that's basically an overview of the budget. I would suggest that you look at not only the budget recommendations that are for FY15 and 16, but to look at the projections for going forward, because that addresses and outlines once again something we already know, and that is urban cities, including the city of Flint, suffer from a structural deficit. If you project the revenue sources that we have going into the future, and you compare them to the demands for expenses, just current expenses, and you throw in retiree health care, you throw in pension, you throw in some other factors like that, there's a gap every year, and there is a point in time when addressing that gap by reducing expenses becomes impossible. And thus, as the mayor mentioned, there needs to be concerted effort on all of our parts to change the financing structure for local government and to focus specifically on what kind of changes can be made to the city of Flint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambrose. I'm going to call on Councilman Freeman. He's the finance chair, and then I'll start with you, Councilman Mays, and work my way around. But if Mr. Early has a final comment.
Just one final comment, Mr. President. In closing, we recognize the difficulty going forward in finalizing this document and the challenge that it presents to the community. But I look forward to your moving this document to Councilman Freeman's committee so that we can begin the discussion on the detail and the information there. And just as the mayor said, to examine all possible avenues over the period of time leading up to the end of the first half of fiscal year 14-15. I want to thank you and the council again for the input. As you know, Mr. Ambrose has done an excellent job of leading you through some of the discussions about your priorities and the strategic plan, which are part and parcel to the overall health of the city from a financial standpoint. I also want to thank the other staff who, in their individual departments, have worked to put this document together. We certainly are prepared at those committee meetings to address your questions and to help you to understand what's in the budget. I know this is the first time you've seen it. Take the next week or so to go through the document in detail, formulate questions based on the material contained therein, so that we can have a very productive time together over the next few weeks in understanding and putting forth what we think, as I said before, is not only a balanced but a very responsible spending plan as we lead up to the decisions that will have to be made going beyond the 2 years of the financial plan you have before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Early. Councilman Freeman?
Yeah, I'm just going to make a motion that we put this document on file so that we can begin the committee work next Tuesday, I believe it is, at 5 o'clock, and I think DPW will be our first meeting. So that's my motion.
Support.
Okay, it's been moved and supported to place on file, and we'll start with Councilman Mays, then I'll work my way around. Councilman Mays.
Since the motion is on the floor to put it in file, as a point of order, do you want us to limit our discussion to the motion to put it on file, or what we just heard?
Well, the motion is to put it on file. I think the discussion that we all will have will be during these finance committee meetings, so I would request that my colleagues comment on requesting to put it on file, because we're not taking any action other than to receive it today, place it on file, and then start to have our financial committee meetings in the very near future. So
I have no problem with that order.
Thank
but
you.
I also wanted to let you know that in the order that we just dealt with, the special order, the emergency manager, the mayor, and Mr. Ambrose, after we dispose of this one way or another, I would still like to circle back, if it's okay, while we're here. I have no discussion on putting it on file. I'll vote in favor of putting it on file.
thank you, Councilman Mays. Councilwoman Poplar.
I'm voting to put it on file.
Thank you. Councilman Nolden.
I'm voting to put it on file, and I'm looking forward to the discussions in the Finance Committee meetings in the next few weeks.
Councilman Freeman. Councilman Montois Davis.
I'm looking forward to continue to engage about the budget, and hopefully that whatever decision that we make is in the better interest of the people. And I'm looking forward to put it on file so that we can continue on with this discussion.
Okay. Councilman Neely, comments? Councilperson.
I am looking forward to the same with my colleagues, but one of the things I would like to put on record is Mr. Ambrose, during those discussions, I'd like to find out, if you can have it prepared, I'd like to find out where the, I don't know if it's around $12 million that's due from the general fund to the water sewer fund, where that is mapped out in this plan. Even though it's only for 2 years, I'd like to see specifically in this plan where we budgeted to pay those monies back, because what I heard from you during the water study is that there is a goal to have that money paid back by 2019. And so since that's the case, and please forgive me if this isn't the proper place, but I really needed the public to know that there is money that's owed from the general fund to the water and sewer fund, and where that plays as it relates to the current status of where we are economically, and how we plan to pay those money back when we're barely having the revenues that we need to keep the city going effectively on a daily basis. So that's one of the things I'd like to see. The other is that I would like more information on...
Point of order.
Point of order.
Can we put it on file, and then Councilperson Galloway, through you to the President, go back to that? We put it
That
on
was
file.
it for me, so we don't need a point of order. So if you could have that,
Councilman
thank you.
Mays. Thank you.
That's what I was getting at.
I know.
After
I just didn't want to
Then we'll go right back.
Councilperson Van Buren.
Support to put on file.
Okay. It's been moved and supported. Discussion's been held to put it on file. Roll, Madam Clerk, to place it on file.
Mr. Mays?
Yes.
Ms. Poplar?
Yes.
Mr. Nolden?
Yes.
Mr. Freeman?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Davis, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Neely?
Yes.
Ms. Galloway?
Yes.
Ms. Van Buren?
Yes.
Mr. Kincaid?
Yes.
Mr. President.
Yes, Councilman Mays, I will now allow for discussion, but
If I could announce the vote.
I'm
As a
sorry.
matter of
Just one
protocol,
second.
please.
Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
The vote is 9 yes, 0 no on the motion.
Okay. And I request that we all limit our comments to 5 minutes on this discussion.
Mr. President, whatever we do, if Councilwoman Galloway would like, I would like her to continue if she would like, and then come back to me, depending on how you want to do it.
I'm good, thank you.
I think she said she was through.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Mays.
All right, Mr. President, through you to Mr. Early, I'm looking forward to the process and the detailed discussion like what my colleague, Councilwoman Galloway, was starting to get into. I look very forward to that. But as it relates to your limitations on when we meet, how we meet, do we call our own special meetings, I've got a problem with digesting information under those limitations. If we are truly going to transition back into home rule, because that's the carrot on the stick, do what we do with the carrot on the stick of transitioning back to governing ourselves. You said in committee meeting that this would be the mayor's and the council's budget. But I know what Public Act 436 says. It says you can act as the mayor and the council whenever you want to. But I believe people in what they say. But I've learned in my wisdom to don't go off of what people say, go off of what they do. So I'm going to right now communicate based upon what I've heard you say. You say this is the mayor and the council's budget. I take my hat off to Councilman Kincaid's appointed finance chair, Josh Freeman, because he gets the information first. And I take my hat off to the governance structure that you set up or somebody set up. In the old days, the whole council used to act as the finance committee. And we would get information and we had to be there and we had a duty and responsibility. I do understand that council people who are not on the finance committee can attend the finance committee meetings, but you got 3 members on every committee. I look forward to the legislative committee today, but I don't know why it didn't meet. I'll find out later, but I had a 4 o'clock schedule for legislative and then it didn't meet. That's different from finance. My point is this. The charter gives us the right to call special meetings within so many hours when we need them. I was a pretty smart guy in school. You might not believe it, but I would get A's and B's, and math and arithmetic wasn't a bad subject for me. I count pretty good. I've watched this council budget process for 20 years before I got here. And so now I'm here and I have a duty and a responsibility to look at these facts and figures, ask questions. I've got some wrote now. But before I get into the specifics, because look at what's happening right now. We're given 5 minutes on the budget, but y'all get hours and hours. And the only way we can function as a team is when we all sit and meet as 9. It's against the Open Meetings Act. It's against law to meet and round robin, but you know, some people figure out how to do it. I prefer doing my business open in the public with 9 colleagues acting as one. So my point is this. Will you tell me, in this public arena, will you take the rules off as it relates to us meeting for finance committees and the rules governing us working as a team when we want, as we want, setting the meetings as we want, rather than you setting them as we try to tackle this budget? That would be a good start for transitioning back to self-government. It would be a good start for us being treated as adults as we deal with this budget process. Will you respond specifically to that opportunity to get this work done?
Thank you, Mr. Mays. Mr. Early?
My response is that the orders that have been drafted and have been adopted by the emergency manager for now will remain in place as they were drafted.
Good. Could you say that again? I couldn't hear you. And speak, could you, Mr. President, through you to the emergency manager.
He's going to respond.
The orders, as drafted by the emergency manager, will stand as written and adopted.
Councilwoman Poplar, do you have any comments at this time?
Yes.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Mine will be brief.
Thank you.
What I heard was a lot of gloom and doom. And I'm hoping that over these next few weeks that we can work through this without further, I don't want to say murdering the people in the city of Flint, the constituents, but they're hanging by a noose. And when you tell me that we're going to have to cut police and fire, I wouldn't give a hoot nor a holler if we didn't have not one soul in an office downstairs. I would prefer seeing everybody close the doggone doors and we have police and fire. So we're going to work through this. But I'm not a happy camper. When you tell me, and I have to tell my constituents, when you, a lot of you get in your cars and you ride out of Dodge every day and ride back up in here, and our people that live, stick and stay in this city don't have any police and don't have any fire, and then you want to cut. But we're going to work through this. But right now, I'm going to tell you, I'm not a happy camper. Now, my second little thing, and I'm going to pass the baton on. Megan, I have worked with you with the master plan and all of that. But when we go through this budget, St. Luke's New Life Center, they need some community block.
All Black America come together for Juneteenth, celebrate our Freedom Day.
Juneteenth, a time to reflect and rejoice. Join the village. Celebrate African American Independence Day.